Aaron thought he had the perfect marriage, until a single text revealed his wife Emma's betrayal. Fueled by heartbreak and rage, he uncovered her affair with a man named Jake and meticulously plotted his revenge. At a carefully orchestrated dinner party, Aaron exposed Emma in front of their friends, leaving her humiliated and alone. But as the dust settled, Aaron discovered that revenge comes at a steep price. When Emma's life spirals into tragedy, Aaron is forced to confront the devastating consequences of his actions, and the emptiness that revenge left behind. This is a gripping tale of betrayal, justice, and the unexpected toll of retribution. It was the kind of evening that made me feel content with my life. The sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over our quiet suburban street. I had just finished mowing the lawn, and the faint scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air. My wife, Emma, was inside, humming a soft tune as she cooked dinner. From the outside looking in, we seemed like the perfect couple. That night, like so many others, we sat down to eat together. Emma served her famous lasagna, a recipe she'd learned from her grandmother. We talked about work, our neighbors, and her latest book club drama. She laughed as she recounted how one of the women tried to pass off a store-bought cake as homemade. Her laughter was warm, genuine, or at least it seemed that way. After dinner, Emma excused herself to take a shower. "I'll be quick," she said, kissing me on the cheek before disappearing upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing the dishes, still thinking about how lucky I was to have her. We'd been married for 6 years, and though we'd had our ups and downs like any couple, I never doubted that she was the love of my life. That's when her phone buzzed on the counter. It was instinctual. I glanced at the screen, not to pry but just out of curiosity. A message popped up, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow." My heart skipped a beat. The sender was someone named Jake. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a friend from work, or a joke. But deep down, a sick feeling settled in my gut. Something wasn't right. Before I could stop myself, I picked up her phone and unlocked it. Emma had never hidden her passcode from me. It was our anniversary date. I opened her messages, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The conversation with Jake went back weeks, maybe months. It wasn't just casual banter, it was intimate, playful, and filled with inside jokes I didn't recognize. They'd been meeting up at a hotel not far from our house. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. The most recent text read, "Wish you didn't have to go home to him tonight. Soon it'll just be us." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could hear the water still running upstairs, Emma blissfully unaware that her entire facade was unraveling. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, confusion. How could she do this to me? To us? For a moment, I thought about storming upstairs, confronting her right then and there. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she'd just caused me. But then another thought crept into my mind, cold and calculated, "Not yet. Don't act on emotion. You deserve more than a messy confrontation. You deserve revenge." I put her phone back on the counter, exactly where she'd left it, and walked out onto the porch to catch my breath. The cool night air did little to calm the fire burning in my chest. I lit a cigarette, a habit I'd kicked years ago but suddenly craved, and stared out at the quiet street. Memories of our life together flooded my mind. The day we met at a coffee shop when I accidentally spilled my drink on her and she laughed instead of getting angry. The way she looked on our wedding day, radiant in her white dress, promising to love me for better or worse. The nights we'd stayed up late, dreaming about the future we wanted to build together. It was all a lie. I thought about the years I'd spent working long hours to provide for us, to give Emma the life she said she always wanted. The vacations, the home renovations, the little surprises I planned just to see her smile. Had any of it meant anything to her? By the time Emma came downstairs, her hair damp and her cheeks flushed from the hot shower, I had forced myself to act normal. I didn't mention the messages or Jake. Instead, I smiled and asked if she wanted to watch a movie. She curled up next to me on the couch, resting her head on my shoulder, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go, but I also couldn't act impulsively. If Emma wanted to betray me, she was going to pay for it in ways she couldn't even imagine. During my lunch break at work, I made the first move. I called a private investigator, someone a colleague had once recommended during an offhand conversation about messy divorces. His name was Greg, and he sounded confident, almost bored, when I explained my situation. "Look," he said, "this isn't my first rodeo. Give me her name, a recent photo, and any info you have about this Jake guy. I'll handle the rest." I didn't hesitate. I sent him everything I knew. By the end of the call, I felt a small sense of control returning to my life. If Emma wanted to play games, I was going to make sure she didn't win. Over the next few days, I kept up the act. I kissed her goodbye in the morning, sent her texts asking how her day was, and brought home her favorite takeout when I worked late. But behind the scenes, I was gathering ammunition. Greg was efficient. Within a week, he had everything I needed: photos of Emma and Jake entering and leaving the motel together, timestamps of their meetings, even screenshots of Jake's social media, where he'd posted cryptic messages about forbidden love and finding someone who finally understands him. It was all laid out in a neat little folder, ready to be used when the time was right. But I wasn't just going to confront her. No, I wanted her to feel the same sense of helplessness, the same heartbreak, that she'd inflicted on me. I began to quietly prepare for what would come next. Emma had no idea what was happening. To her, everything was normal. She'd smile at me over breakfast, kiss me goodnight, and occasionally mention plans with her book club. I didn't let on that I knew those book club meetings were really just rendezvous with Jake. Every time she lied to my face, it fueled my determination. I didn't just want her to regret what she'd done, I wanted to dismantle the life she'd built on my trust and sacrifice. And so, I waited, biding my time, knowing that when the moment came, she wouldn't see it coming. The days passed slowly, but every second I waited felt like another brick in the foundation of my plan. Emma had no idea what was coming. She carried on like everything was normal, like she wasn't living a double life. And me? I perfected the art of acting like nothing was wrong. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, complimented her cooking at night, and even laughed at her stories about work. It wasn't easy, but every fake smile was a reminder of the storm I was building behind the scenes. I became a master observer. Every move she made, every excuse she gave, every detail about her plans, with the book club or her girls' nights out, I logged it all in my mind. Each lie she told me only made my resolve stronger. And when she'd glance down at her phone with that little smirk she thought I didn't notice, I knew she was texting him. Jake. The man who thought he could take what was mine. Greg, the private investigator, continued feeding me information like clockwork. It turned out that Jake wasn't just some random fling. He was a personal trainer at a gym Emma occasionally went to, the kind of guy who posted shirtless selfies and motivational quotes like, "No pain, no gain." Real original. According to Greg's report, he was divorced, barely scraping by on his paycheck, and living in a tiny apartment downtown. In other words, the complete opposite of the life Emma and I had built together. I couldn't understand it. Why would she risk everything for him? But then I realized, it didn't matter why. What mattered was what I was going to do about it. The first step in my plan was financial. Emma and I had a joint savings account, one we'd been contributing to for years. I'd always made more money than her, my career as a financial advisor was stable and lucrative, but I never saw it as my money. It was ours. Or at least, it used to be. I started transferring funds out of the joint account, little by little, into an account under my name only. I was careful, moving just a few $100s at a time so it wouldn't raise any red flags. By the time I was done, nearly 80% of our savings was under my control. Legally, I was entitled to it. I'd contributed the majority of the money, and I wasn't about to let her spend a dime of it on Jake or their secret little rendezvous. Next, I started documenting everything. Every interaction I had with Emma, every lie she told, every suspicious activity I noticed, I kept it all in a journal. I knew that if this ended in divorce, I'd need more than just Greg's photos to make my case airtight. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no room for her to manipulate the narrative. About 2 weeks after I discovered the affair, Emma told me she was going to a weekend retreat with her book club. She gave me a whole story about how they'd rented a cabin in the mountains, how it was going to be a digital detox, and how she'd come back refreshed and recharged. I nodded, smiled, and told her it sounded like a great idea. "I'll miss you," I said, playing my part perfectly. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "I'll miss you too." But as soon as she walked out the door with her overnight bag, I was on the phone with Greg. "She's heading to the cabin now," I told him. "Follow her." It didn't take long for Greg to confirm what I already knew. There was no book club retreat. Instead, Emma drove to a motel about an hour away, where Jake was already waiting for her. Greg snapped photos of them checking in together, holding hands, looking every bit the happy couple. It made my blood boil, but I stayed focused. This was just another piece of the puzzle. While Emma was off with her lover, I got to work. I spent the weekend meeting with my divorce lawyer, going over every detail of what I'd discovered. He was impressed by how thorough I'd been. "This is solid," he said, flipping through the evidence Greg had collected. "With this, we'll have no problem proving infidelity. She's not going to get much in the settlement." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. When Emma came back Sunday evening, she looked relaxed, almost glowing. She walked through the door, her bag slung over her shoulder, and smiled at me like she didn't have a care in the world. "How was the retreat?" I asked, pretending to be genuinely interested. "It was amazing," she said, setting her bag down and leaning in to kiss me. "So peaceful. I really needed that." I forced a smile. "I'm glad you had a good time." As she unpacked, I noticed a receipt sticking out of the side pocket of her bag. When she wasn't looking, I grabbed it and slipped it into my pocket. Later, in the privacy of my home office, I unfolded it and saw exactly what I expected, a dinner bill for 2 at a restaurant near the motel. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine. The date and time matched perfectly with Greg's timeline. I stared at the receipt for a long time, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me again. The lies, the betrayal, the blatant disregard for our marriage, it was all there in black and white. But instead of breaking down, I felt a strange sense of calm. This wasn't a setback. It was another weapon I could use when the time came. Over the next few days, I began putting the final pieces of my plan into place. I contacted a real estate agent to quietly assess the value of our house, letting her know that I might be looking to sell soon. I also started moving some of my personal belongings, important documents, sentimental items, anything I didn't want Emma to get her hands on, into a storage unit I'd rented under a fake name. I knew Emma would notice if I moved out completely, so I kept everything subtle. A missing photo album here, a few empty drawers there. She was too distracted by her affair to pay much attention anyway. The hardest part was keeping up the act. Every time Emma smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodnight, every time she looked me in the eye and lied to my face, it took everything I had not to snap. But I knew that if I confronted her too soon, I'd lose the upper hand. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I was no longer the naive husband who believed in happily ever after. I was a man with a plan, and I was determined to make her pay for what she'd done. It was a quiet Saturday night when I decided to set the stage for what was coming. Emma was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, while I sat on the couch pretending to be engrossed in a football game. In reality, my mind wasn't on the screen at all. Instead, it was on the folder of damning evidence hidden in my office desk upstairs and the intricate series of events I was about to put into motion. "Want a glass?" Emma asked, holding up the bottle of wine. "Sure," I replied with a smile that probably seemed genuine to her. I had gotten good at pretending. Too good, really. As she handed me the glass, she curled up next to me on the couch. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, running her hand along my arm. "I feel like I never see you anymore. Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway soon. Just the two of us." The audacity of her words almost made me choke on my drink. A weekend getaway? After all the ones she'd already taken, with Jake. "That sounds great," I said, swallowing my disgust. "Let's talk about it this week." She smiled and leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of her betrayal pressing against me like a suffocating blanket. But I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I let her think everything was fine because that's exactly what I needed her to believe. The next day, I made my first move. Emma had mentioned that she'd be at her boutique job for most of the afternoon, so I took advantage of the time alone. I went through every corner of our house, collecting anything that might complicate things later: marriage certificates, joint account information, old tax returns. I made sure I had control over everything that mattered. Then, I started preparing for the dinner party. It was a simple idea, really. Emma loved playing the perfect hostess, and I knew she wouldn't question it if I suggested we invite a few friends over for an intimate evening. She was always eager to show off our home, our life, our perfect marriage. So when I brought it up that evening, she immediately jumped on board. "That sounds lovely," she said, already scrolling through her phone to make a guest list. "Just a small group," I said casually. "Close friends, maybe a couple of your book club buddies." I could see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't thinking about book club friends. She was thinking about Jake. "Maybe I'll invite a coworker or two," she said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Just to mix things up." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. That's exactly what I wanted her to do. The week leading up to the dinner party was a blur of preparations. Emma threw herself into planning, picking out a menu, buying new candles for the dining table, even splurging on a new dress. I let her handle all of it, playing the supportive husband while secretly preparing for the grand finale. The guest list ended up being a mix of our friends and her co-workers, including Jake. When she mentioned his name, I pretended not to recognize it. "Jake?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "Have I met him before?" "He's new at the gym," she said quickly. "Really nice guy. You'll like him." I smiled and nodded, already picturing the look on her face when the truth came out. The night of the dinner party arrived, and Emma was in her element. She flitted around the house in her new red dress, lighting candles and adjusting the place settings. She looked beautiful, radiant, even, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with. But then I reminded myself of the texts, the photos, the lies. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold determination. The guests began arriving around 7. Emma greeted them at the door with hugs and smiles, offering drinks and appetizers like the perfect hostess she pretended to be. When Jake walked in, I saw her face light up in a way that made my stomach turn. He was tall, muscular, and wearing a smug grin that I wanted to wipe off his face. "Jake, this is my husband, Aaron," Emma said, introducing us. I extended my hand, gripping his firmly. "Nice to meet you," I said, forcing a smile. "You too," Jake replied, though his tone was hesitant. Maybe he sensed something was off, or maybe he was just uncomfortable meeting the man whose life he was helping to destroy. Either way, I didn't care. As the evening went on, I played the role of the perfect host. I laughed, poured drinks, and made small talk with everyone, all while keeping an eye on Emma and Jake. They were careful, but not careful enough. I saw the way their hands brushed when she handed him a glass of wine, the way they exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. It was almost insulting how little effort they put into hiding it. By the time dinner was served, the tension in the room was palpable, at least for me. Emma and Jake seemed oblivious, chatting and laughing like everything was fine. But I wasn't just sitting there quietly. I was waiting for the perfect moment. It came during dessert. Emma stood to make a toast, thanking everyone for coming and talking about how grateful she was for her friends, her life, her marriage. Her words were dripping with irony, but I let her finish before standing up myself. "Thank you, Emma," I said, raising my glass. "I'd like to say a few words too." The room went quiet as everyone turned their attention to me. Emma smiled, clearly expecting me to say something sweet or sentimental. Jake looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "Marriage is a beautiful thing," I began, keeping my tone calm and steady. "It's built on trust, love, and loyalty. Or at least, it's supposed to be." Emma's smile faltered. "Unfortunately," I continued, "sometimes, people forget what those words mean. They lie. They betray the person they promised to spend their life with. And they think they can get away with it." The air in the room grew heavy. Emma's face had gone pale, her eyes darting between me and the guests. Jake was staring at the table, refusing to look up. "I didn't want to believe it at first," I said, pulling the folder of evidence from under the table. But the proof was impossible to ignore. I opened the folder and began laying out the photos, one by one, on the table. Photos of Emma and Jake entering the motel together. Photos of them kissing in the parking lot. Receipts, text messages, everything Greg had collected. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and the scrape of chairs as people leaned forward to see the evidence. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Aaron, please," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jake looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking for the first time that night. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." Emma tried to speak, but no words came out. "I hope it was worth it," I said, turning to Jake. "Because as of tonight, you can have her. I'm done." With that, I walked out of the room, leaving Emma and Jake to face the fallout. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The damage was done. The aftermath of the dinner party was as chaotic as I had expected. The friends who had been our closest confidants, those who had seen us as the perfect couple, had turned their backs on Emma. They called and texted me over the following days, offering condolences and words of support. They praised my strength, my composure, and my ability to handle such a betrayal with dignity. But none of their words meant anything. The truth was, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel dignified. I felt hollow. I'd won, hadn't I? I'd exposed Emma for the liar she was. I'd taken control of our finances, prepared for divorce, and left her with nothing but the fallout of her own decisions. Jake had disappeared, ghosting her within days of the dinner party. Rumor had it he'd gone back to his ex-wife, leaving Emma to deal with her shattered reputation alone. But still, I couldn't shake the emptiness. The anger that had driven me for weeks was gone, replaced by something worse, an aching sadness I couldn't escape. My days felt aimless, my nights restless. Our house, once filled with laughter and love, was now silent and suffocating. I'd fought so hard for justice, for revenge, but I hadn't realized the cost until it was too late. About a month after the dinner party, I got a call from Emma. It was the first time I'd heard her voice since that night. "Aaron," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond right away. My instinct was to hang up, to end the conversation before it began. But something in her tone stopped me. "What do you want, Emma?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, and I could hear the faint sound of her breathing, shaky and uneven. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Her words stirred something in me. Not forgiveness, but a deep, gnawing sadness. "You're sorry?" I said bitterly. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you even understand the damage you caused?" "I do," she said, her voice breaking. "I think about it every day. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. I lost myself somewhere along the way." The bitterness in my chest warred with the memories of the woman I'd once loved, the woman who had been my best friend before all of this. But the wounds were still too fresh, too raw. "I can't do this, Emma," I said, my voice cold. "I've moved on. You should too." I ended the call before she could say another word. 2 weeks later, I was at the office when I got another call. This one was from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Mitchell?" a woman's voice said. "Yes, this is Aaron," I replied. "This is Detective Martinez with the County Police Department. I'm afraid I have some difficult news to share with you regarding your wife, Emma." My stomach dropped. "What's going on?" "She was found earlier this morning in her apartment. It appears she overdosed on prescription medication. I'm very sorry to tell you this, but she didn't make it." For a moment, the world around me went silent. The hum of my office, the faint sound of co-workers talking nearby, it all faded into the background. "What?" I managed to choke out. "There was a note," the detective continued. "It was addressed to you." I hung up without another word, the phone slipping from my hand as I stared blankly at my desk. Emma was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman I had hated, the woman who had betrayed me, she was gone. The next day, I found myself standing in her empty apartment. The landlord had let me in after explaining that Emma had named me as her emergency contact. The place was a mess, clothes scattered on the floor, dishes piling up in the sink, an empty wine bottle on the coffee table. It was a far cry from the meticulously organized home we'd once shared. On the small kitchen table was the letter. My name was written on the envelope in Emma's familiar handwriting, the edges of the paper smudged with tears. I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook as I unfolded the page, the words blurring for a moment before coming into focus. "Aaron. I know this is the last thing you want to hear from me, and I don't blame you for hating me. I've hated myself every day since the night you exposed the truth. You were right about everything. I lied to you, I betrayed you, and I destroyed the life we built together. I thought I wanted something else, something more, but all I found was emptiness. Jake was never worth it. Nothing I did was worth it. You gave me everything, Aaron. Your love, your trust, your loyalty. And I threw it all away because I was too blind, too selfish to see what I already had. I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'll never ask for it. I just need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Even when I was at my worst, even when I was making the worst mistakes of my life, I loved you. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope, in time, you can find peace. I hope you can find happiness again. I'm so sorry." I sat there for hours, the letter crumpled in my hands as tears streamed down my face. For the first time since this all began, I let myself feel the grief I had been avoiding, the grief of losing the woman I had loved for so many years, the grief of seeing everything we'd built together crumble into nothing. I thought revenge would make me feel better. I thought exposing her, humiliating her, taking everything from her would give me closure. But sitting there in her empty apartment, I realized the truth: there were no winners in this story. Emma was gone, and no amount of justice or vengeance could bring her back. That night, I went home to the house we had once shared, the house that now felt more like a tomb than a home. I sat in the dark, clutching her letter, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry, not out of anger, but out of loss. Some wounds never heal. Some mistakes can't be undone. And sometimes, the cost of revenge is far greater than the betrayal that started it all.